Good afternoon. I hope everybody had a good lunch.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Ms. King, you may resume your examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Donahue, I believe we were looking at Exhibit 25. Can we bring that back up, Vanessa, please? Okay. Dr. Donahue, can you orient the court as to where, if this road was shown, it should appear?
Meaning the road from the 1763 layout.
Correct.
Correct. So from the houses that are calls on the road that we talked about before, Nathaniel Taylor and Hugh Smith and Zacchaeus Green being just off it to the east, it should strike the southern bound line of Carlisle about where the line jogs a bit and where the dotted pinprick lines take off right there. That's the road should cross just about in that location.
But Dr. Donahue, I do see an annotation below the hand. What is that annotation as you understand it?
I believe that it reads Captain Green's pasture.
And do you have any understanding as to what Captain Green's pasture was?
It was a pasture belonging to, as far as I can understand, Captain John Green, who had a great deal of land in that area. And he had purchased it, seems like he had purchased it from David Brown. It appears in his inventory in 1802.
And how does the location of Captain Green's pasture relate to what you've testified the purpose of this map was?
What appears to be the point at which the various proposed boundaries for Carlisle deviate from one another.
And Dr. Donahue, did you consider the absence of the 1763 of the road described in the 1763 layout in your analysis of the road in this case?
Yes.
And what if any significance did you apply to it?
It's another piece of confounding or conflicting evidence in that it does not appear.
Okay. Moving. Let me take that down. Now, Dr. Donahue, as an environmental historian, you have studied, as we've discussed, the colonial period of time in this area. Are there certain types of documents you look to see how land or ways, whether man-made or natural, develop over time?
Well, the kinds of documents that we've been discussing, deeds and probated estates and town records and so forth.
Do you look at any documents that span over a significant amount of time?
Yes, indeed. Many of them are, appear year after year or every now and then, but there's many of them through the whole period. Yes.
And in a case like this, where you're assessing a layout or a road or the existence of it, would you look at documents over a large period of time to see the documentation regarding the road?
Well, yes, with anything. I mean, I think that in almost any line of work, that if you want to look over a large number of a certain kind of document to see if some kind of pattern emerges, or so you can get some kind of context for a particular piece of information you're interested in, and then you're not trying to analyze it in a vacuum.
So, Dr. Donahue, have you reviewed what's been entered as Exhibit 155? I'm sorry, 115. The assignment to highway surveyors in this case. It's a group of documents.
I have. There's a lot of them, right?
And would this be one of those documents or a compilation of documents that spans a period of time?
Yes,
And did you consider these survey or highway assignments in your analysis in this case?
I did.
And were you able to, did you consider them significant in rendering your opinion?
Yes.
And how?
Well, it was very difficult for me to discern a pattern in terms of what sorts of ways would be assigned to these surveyors and what sorts of ways wouldn't.
Why was it difficult to discern a pattern?
Well, because, well, for a specific example, there are some ways that we know we have layouts of in the town of Concord in this period. So, and I can't find them on any of these highway surveyors' records. So they were there and yet somehow they weren't being assigned.
And why is that?
And I raised an objection. We didn't, none of this line of questioning was disclosed to us before today. At his deposition, he knew nothing about these highway surveyors' records when we asked him about it. So, and there's no foundation that he can opine on their meaning either.
Well, I didn't quite understand his answer anyway, so we can move on to the next question. We'll take it from there.
No, sir. Okay. Hold on, Your Honor, 1 second. Okay. Dr. Donahue, did you listen to Ms. Heitert's testimony in regards to the Estabrook cellar hole along the trail in question?
Yes.
Did you do any research regarding the origins of the Estabrook cellar hole?
Yes.
And what type of research did you do?
Well, to look at the layout of the 1763 road and several deeds that included that are of that parcel of Duck Buttrick's pasture.
Okay, so let's take it with the 1763 layout first. How did that inform your analysis of the Estabrook cellar hole?
It's not there.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
It's not there.
It's not there.
The cellar hole, there's no mention of a building in Buttrick's pasture. So
Would you have expected to see mention of it in 1763 in the county layout if it was there at that time?
yes, as we know, where the road runs today goes right by it, within a couple feet of it. The purpose of laying out roads like that, at least for the people in the north, was, as we've been saying, to allow them to have a road to travel on. So if there were a house in that location, it would be astounding that it wasn't mentioned in the 1763 layout. So my conclusion is, in 1763, there was no house there.
Now, you mentioned that you reviewed a series of deeds related to the land on which that cellar hole currently is. What were the time periods of the deeds you reviewed?
1767 up through 1799.
And did you see any evidence of a house or a homestead or a building in those deeds?
No.
Would you have expected to see such evidence in deeds?
Almost invariably, a deed from this time period of parcel of land, if it had a building on it, that would be mentioned in the.
I object and move to strike the last, since he hasn't been qualified to analyze deeds and what should be in them and what shouldn't be in them.
He's testified that he's reviewed hundreds of deeds. I'll allow the testimony.
Now, Dr. Donahue, are you familiar with Ms. Heitert's testimony regarding the topography of what she determined was Hugh Cargill Road and why? Are you familiar with her testimony regarding that?
Yes.
Now, Dr. Donahue, have you had the opportunity to observe any portion of what Ms. Heitert characterized as the Hugh Cargill Road near the lime kiln mines?
Yes, so that would, I believe she was speaking of the
That's
first.
a yes or no.
I'm
That's a yes or
sorry.
no.
Okay. And were you able to observe the topography of that area?
Well, the topography of the area in question would be running across Buttrick's pasture down to where Hugh Cargill Road intersects the property line. That's what she was discussing. So that's near the lime mine, or near the lime mines in that area, right?
Now, I'm asking you to wear a double hat now as both a environmental historian and a farmer. Did you observe whether that road, as identified as Hugh Cargill, would have been a functional alternative for a colonial farmer during the period in question?
In the first place, it was already there. It was there as a beaten path. It was describing the first alternative followed an existing way or an existing road. I forget the exact term, through that area. I agree that it becomes steep as it goes down to Hugh Cargill Road. It's perhaps not ideal. I think it would be possible to utilize a road in that location as a way at that time, though.
And why do you believe it would have been possible to utilize that way as a farmer during that time?
Well, it's no steeper than, many other parts of other roads around. I mean, I agree that the alternative going south that was chosen has a more gradual grade, but.
And does the juxtaposition of that area to Concord Center inform whether it would have been usable for farmers in that time?
Well, it's a kind of a subtle point, but as far as landowners to the south within Concord who had been using that road until there was settlement up in Carlisle, they would have been simply using it to get up to their woodlots, their meadows. And in that case, luckily for them, they would have been going uphill with an empty cart or sled and coming back down with the loaded one. So the uphill part would have been less of an impediment.
Okay. Dr. Donahue, we're now going to take a little bit jump back in time.
Right.
And I'd like to orient the court to the early history of Concord. Now I've pulled up what's been marked as chalk P. Dr. Donahue, do you recognize this document?
I do.
And what are we looking at?
It's very similar to a figure from my book, The Great Meadow. I may have redone it slightly for a presentation at some time.
Can you explain what we are looking at?
We are looking at a snapshot of land holdings in the town of Concord in 1653.
I'm sorry, what year?
1653, Your Honor. It's at the time that the second division of the town of Concord began. So what it shows, in order to do the second division, landowners had to declare what first division lands they had. And so I mapped for the entire town of Concord the approximate location of all of those grants to about 50 or 60 households. So the various colored small polygons you see there are those lots they had. The white background within the bounds of the original town of Concord that we see there, which is about 7 miles on a side, is common land. So during the first division from 1635 to 1653, about 3/4 of the town of Concord, all that part around the outside, basically, inside the bounds, of course, of Concord, was owned by the town in common and used for cutting wood or pasturing stock and so forth. The other lots belonged to individuals. They granted them to themselves. So the purplish ones are house lots and the brown ones are tillage lots that they had within certain large fields, as you can see there. And then the green ones are, I think, a good bit of interest to us because they're meadowlands. As we've been talking, you can see a lot of them are in the Great Meadow, which stretches along the Concord River going north. And there's some along other brooks in town and rivers where they're a lot clustered together. And then there are a few of them just scattered out across the common land where there are wetlands here and there, some of them belonging to just one individual or maybe two, subdivided between them. So just briefly, the reason for that is that hay was a very crucial resource to these settlers to bring their cattle through a long 6-month winter. And hay, again, was cut on wet parcels because it grew the most grass. So that one of the first things they did as they granted land to themselves was to grant these wetlands that were some of them swamps, some of them already grassy, and get to work improving them to get a hay supply.
So I want to be clear, Dr. Donahue, when I see these various parcels, whether they're brown or yellow or orange or purple or green, those are at that time owned by an individual?
Almost all of them. There might be a handful that are owned by a small group of individuals, but they are private land, and the rest of the land still belongs to the town as a whole.
Can you explain to me, can you orient us where on this map we would find the relevant area of interest in this case?
Sure, Vanessa will. Oh, you're gonna, yeah. So where she go, yeah, there. So those are some of the meadows that we've been talking about, Joseph's Meadow and Swamp Oak Meadow and so forth are in that general vicinity, Nonesuch Meadow. It's that area, and then running north into what would become Carlisle from there. Yeah, so that's what it looked like in 1653, roughly speaking.
And are any of those parcels, to the extent you can tell from this chalk P near where Vanessa's little cursor hand is, are any of those owned by, do you know the ownership of any of those? Is Jonathan, is there a Buttrick division grant up there?
No, that occurs in the 2nd division.
Okay, apologies. Okay, so what happens after 1635?
1653.
1653.
Thank you. Well, as I say, they made a 2nd division of the town. They took a decision to take all that common land and essentially privatize or enclose it. This is called the 2nd division. And it took them some years to accomplish it because it's a lot of land, but each person proprietor of the town who had land ownership at that time from the 1st division made claims for 3 acres for each one that they had owned up to then. So they took that 3/4 of the town that had not yet been divided, and they divided it amongst themselves. So almost all of the rest of the land in Concord became privately owned within 10 or so years after 1653.
And on that chalk, I saw referenced, I know we discussed meadow and swamp, but there was also upland. Can you explain what upland is?
I think we went over that earlier.
Okay, I apologize
just to repeat, it's everything else, essentially. It's woodlands and pasture and land that could be converted into plowland or tillage, everything that wasn't wet.
Your Honor, I move to admit the chalk.
As a chalk.
Yes.
Mr. Matt,
As a chalk, Your Honor, we don't object. Is
So-
not an exhibit.
it's chalk P.
No, it's not evidence.
I think we have
Um,
chalk O.
Okay, so I apologize. I think they were previously marked, hence the confusion. I apologize. There was,
So there
I
was,
went site.
I just want to make clear, we had a chalk O already, right? So this would be chalk B.
Yes.
Okay.
So Dr. Donahue, I apologize. Can you reorient me to where we are in our timeline?
At the second division,
And when was the second division?
it began in the 1653, and just how long it took is not completely clear, but it appears to have been mostly completed by the middle of the 1660s.
Now, in terms of the narrative surrounding the area in question, did anything happen in the second division that was relevant to this area?
Yes, all the land was privatized that had previously been commonly owned.
When you say privatized, do you mean all the land went to individuals separately?
Well, no, this was an odd case that didn't occur in other parts of town. Most of the land was granted to private individuals, such as that's when Buttrick's pasture appears. There was a large grant in the second division there to William Buttrick at the time. And, there were grants of upland to people like Thomas Brown and so forth. But the north quarter of the town of Concord, in making these divisions, made a decision to grant something just, turned out to be about 360 acres, something just under 400 acres to themselves as a what they called the 20 score. And the 20 score was a grant of a pasture that was commonly owned, in the sense that it was now owned by these 20 individuals. It was no longer owned by the town as a whole or the North Quarter. It had passed into private ownership, but it was like a condominium or something along those lines. Each of these proprietors now had a right within that land, but they had chosen not to subdivide it any further amongst themselves at that point. So it would be referred to as a 20-acre right in the 20 score.
Okay.
They wanted a large piece of common pasture.
So what would be the utility of the 20s of owning this with 19 other proprietors?
Well, they were in the process of clearing land and converting it into pasture all over the place. And they made a decision that at least some of that would be convenient to hold it as a pasture for all of them. And I think, as we'll see, as the thing developed, particularly for sheep.
So I just want to quickly go back to the last chalk to make a point of clarification.
All right. I'm sorry, that wasn't
So
me to say all right.
so you had described the white area on this map as commons. Can you distinguish what you mean when you say commons and of this white, and what this commonly held 20 square was?
Yes, again, the town itself as a whole, as a corporate body, owned the land in common from the time of the establishment of the town in 1635. And they made private grants to themselves, essentially. They set up processes to do that. So that land would be, at that time, would be controlled by the Board of Selectmen and town meeting, as to how it was used, where it could be grazed, by whom, how many cattle you could put on it, that sort of thing. After the 20 score, virtually all of the land in the town was divided into private ownership. The people in this part of town decided that one thing they would do would be to have a piece of land that belonged to 20 of them together, not to the town as a whole, not to everyone who lived in that part of town, so that after that it could be passed down to their children, the rights within it, or bought and sold, and so forth.
So the 20 score first appears again in what year?
In the course of the second division.
And
From 1653 over the next several years.
So there's this large chunk of land held by 20 proprietors privately, but together.
20 landowners, correct.
And what happens then?
Well, the next that we see it is in 1697, when these proprietors decide to divide part of it among themselves. So everyone who has either inherited or purchased a right within the 20 score takes part in a division of the 20 score. To do that division, though, they decided that the southern half or so of it would still be retained as a common pasture among themselves that they called the sheep common.
Okay,
So
so I just
that
want to,
was-
I want
yes,
to break that down a little bit because it's a bit complicated. So
yes.
this giant part, do you remember how big the 20 square was approximately?
Well, it was supposed to be 400 acres, but if you add up the acreages in the 3 grants that they made to finally totally privatize it down to the level of individuals, you come up with 360 acres.
Okay.
20
So
times 18.
This giant 360 acres of what we call 20 score was,
Which had a
Subsequent-
couple of meadows embedded in the middle of it, by the way.
the
the
meadows.
Anyway,
So it's divided, and the first division of that it gives some of those individual 20 proprietors their
Mhm.
own lots,
yes.
but it
15
reserves,
and 1/4 acres each.
okay, but it reserves what you called a sheep common. Can you explain what you mean when you say it reserved a sheep common?
Well, there was a part of it, I don't remember if it's exactly half, no, less than half, but the southern portion of it, where they essentially drew a line and said everything south of this in the 20 score is now going to be a sheep common. So that the proprietors retained rights within that, but they were not subdivided.
Okay.
And
So, Dr. Donahue, I'm going to bring up Exhibit 4.
okay,
Do you recognize this document?
that is the record of the division of the 20 score in 1697.
So, okay, let me break down. So, so that's the first division of 20 score
Mhm.
in 1697. Now we have a sheep common, and where is that sheep common generally located at vis-a-vis these other private parcels that have been, is it to the east, is it to the west, is it to the south?
It's to the south. It's, as I said before, it's the southern portion of it.
And what happens after the first division of 20 score?
Well, sometime in the neighborhood of 1720, going by subsequent deeds, they made a second division of the sheep common in which they granted themselves the people who were proprietors of it. And now by this time, some people had acquired more than one right. So there were 20 rights, but there weren't necessarily 20 individuals anymore. There might be 16 or 17. Each person got 3 1/4 acres. This left a small amount of land that's still in the sheep common, but it had been much reduced.
And so this reduced sheep common after the second division still existed, but it was held privately by a certain group at that point in time?
Right, right.
Do you know how many people jointly owned it at that time?
Around 16 or 17. A few individuals had acquired a couple rights. In other words, maybe they'd inherited one and purchased another one.
Now, Dr. Donahue, are you familiar? First of all, I take it you've read that document Exhibit 4 before,
Yes,
and it sounds like you're actually quite familiar with it. Is that fair?
I've spent some time with it.
So, are there ways referenced in that document?
There are.
What is your understanding of those ways?
The proprietors in making their divisions say that that is the proprietors of the 20 score, that they appoint some ways within the land they've divided for their use and convenience, I believe it is.
So those proprietors' ways were for the proprietors of the 20 squares, those individuals.
That's what they say in the document.
As opposed to for all proprietors of Concord.
All proprietors of Concord were not making those appointments, if you will.
So, Dr. Donahue, I hear first division, I hear second division. Is there anything that comes after with our story of the 20 score?
Yes, as I think we've heard, in 1730, most of the remaining sheep common is conveyed in a deed to a man named Jonathan Harris. And that's the end of the sheep common.
So, going back to the first division of 20 score, I know we've talked a lot about clues about this road around 1763. Are there clues related to this road having already been a established way, one way or the other, in the first division of 20 score?
Which road, please, again?
Well, so if we look at document or exhibit 4.
Yes.
Three 339A. And if you turn to the bottom of 339A, do you see where it says the proprietors freely and orderly drew lots as follows: Mr. Adam Winthrop the first, which was at 50 Acre Road, Simon Davis, and so on.
Yes, okay. So
You can,
at certain points, the division of the 20 score references the 50 Acre Way, which lay at the west side of the 20 score and was at the time called 50 Acre Way, but in 1699, the county laid it out as Groton Road.
and Dr. Donahue, so you understand 50 Acre Way to be Groton Road, correct?
At that point, yes.
Okay. And are there any indications in this document of another road being referenced that would be consistent? Another pre-existing road being referenced that would be consistent with the road at issue in this case?
Well, the proprietors appointed ways within the 20 score. So if there had been another road that the town had previously laid out within that area, it seems to me that we would have it referenced as being there rather than have the proprietors of that piece of land lay it out on, or appoint it is the word they used, on their own.
Okay, Dr. Donahue, I'd now like to bring up what's Exhibit 3. Dr. Donahue, can you, have you seen this document before?
'99. Yes, I've seen this before.
And what do you understand this document to be?
This is what I was just referring to a moment ago. This is the county laying out Groton Road in 1699.
And is there anything in this document that informed your analysis of whether this road existed at this time period?
This road being what we now call Estabrook Road?
Correct.
Yes, there is.
And what is that?
So you can find it in here. So the Groton Road's a long road. It runs from the meeting house in Concord Center to Groton. It crosses the North Bridge. And if we can find the place in it, it passes the area where today Estabrook Road would diverge from Barnes Road there.
Objection, Your Honor. Once again, the qualifications and the foundation to relate a call in this 1699 layout to current Barnes Hill Road. I move to strike that line of, or that answer, Your Honor, as beyond what Dr. Donahue can testify to.
I think that's something you can cross-examine him about, Mr. Dow.
Well, if I can put it more broadly, at no point between when this crosses the North Bridge and when it reaches what's called 50 Acre Way, do we see any reference to any other way that where this road is making a turn or anything like that? Whereas at other points in this layout, if there's a kind of an alternative, take the left-hand or the right-hand road, the layout specifies which way you're going to go. In this case, in the stretch that passes where Estabrook Road would be merging onto it, there's no such reference.
Your Honor, I'm sorry, we're just trying to find the right chalk to pull up to help illustrate this point. Okay. I'm now showing I will bring up what's been marked chalk E. Apologies. Maybe you can zoom in and scroll down, Vanessa. Dr. Donahue, would you be able to describe, while utilizing this map, the point you were just making?
Well, we'll test Vanessa here. So get to the Old North Bridge. And then from there, the causeway ran west until it hit what's now Liberty Road, a little further south. Yeah. And then it turned and went up there, and the calls go along that way and they follow there, and that passes where Estabrook is now. And then it goes up, and when it hits the corner there, it says it strikes the 50 rod way, and then it turns and goes on north. Up that way. So my point is simply that on that stretch between the North Bridge and that intersection there, well, even the intersection further west, there's no reference to this way appearing. So in 1699, there's no, doesn't tell you as you round the bend or something, bear left.
And is there anything about the orientation of the road that impacts whether you view that as significant or not?
Well, it indicates to me that if there had been a layout before 1699 that had established that as an open way, that they would have told us so.
Your Honor, may I just have a quick 2 minutes to make sure I've covered everything I need to cover with Dr. Donahue?
Sure.
Thank you.
We'll just take 5 minutes, okay?
Thank you, Your Honor.
I will wait a minute for Mr. Bat to get back. Okay, anything else, Ms. King?
No further questions. Thank you, Your Honor.
Right. Mr. Bat, you may cross-examine.
Good afternoon, Dr. Donahue. I know this has been a long day for you, for many of us, and we certainly appreciate your effort to be candid in this testimony. So I'm going to do your cross-examination, and I ask you that you listen to my questions and pause and make sure that you've heard the whole question before you answer. I'm going to start with your publication, The Great Meadow, and ask you just a couple questions about The Great Meadow. Is it fair to say that in that book you concentrated on the east quarter of Concord?
Fair to say that in the later parts of the book, yes.
And by contrast, you focus less on the north quarter in The Great Meadow?
Very fair.
And before this engagement, you did not do any research on Estabrook Road, is that right?
That's correct.
And before this engagement, you did not map the 20 score?
I did not map the 20 score. I placed it. I can't even recall whether I attempted to place, I placed it quite approximately in my mapping of the second division.
Okay. And before this engagement, you did not research the separation of Carlisle from Concord, and this was a question that Harvard asked you to look into, is that right?
That's correct.
And in terms of the scope of your assignment and what Harvard asked you to do, it's fair to say that Harvard asked you to develop opinions concerning Estabrook Road as it runs along Harvard land, is that right?
That's correct.
And that you haven't researched or developed opinions concerning any portion of Estabrook Road south of the Harvard land holdings. Is that accurate to say?
That's mostly accurate.
And mostly accurate in what sense?
Well, in the sense that some of the aspects of the road, as it, for instance, what we were just talking about with Groton Road, are certainly south of the Harvard land, but just relate to the existence of the overall road. But other than that, to look in detail, south of the Harvard land, no.
Fair enough. And so you, as your direct testimony talked about ways in the North Quarter and a broader understanding of the land around Estabrook Road. Is that what you're testifying to now?
That's fair enough.
Okay. And is it correct that you researched and developed your opinions only with respect to the colonial period? So there's a time limit to your testimony.
Well, we said it a little broadly from the colonial period to about 1800. There might have been a deed or two I looked at that went beyond 1800. There was on a particular piece of land just to see where it went, but very little beyond 1800.
And just to be clear, since I objected a number of times to your direct testimony based on your lack of technical skills and training in land surveying, is that the case that you have not had any training in land surveys?
I've had no I have had no training in land surveying, correct.
Nor are you an archaeologist?
I'm not an archaeologist.
And you visited Estabrook Road, you testified, and you observed a number of features along the road. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say.
And you looked at the location of stone walls?
I looked at the location of stone walls, yes.
And I believe your testimony, your deposition was that many ways specified certain width of ways as they were laid out. Is that fair to say?
Objection, mischaracterization of testimony.
Overruled.
Could you clarify in what period or?
In the colonial period,
Yes,
would layouts have generally frequently specified the width of a road?
yes, sometimes. I don't know if it would be the majority of cases, but in very many cases, the width was specified in the layout.
And just observing Estabrook Road on the ground today, what is your observation about the length of the road, its width?
Excuse me, the which of the road?
I'm sorry, is it fair to say that the width of Estabrook Road as it runs from the Carlisle line south to the intersection with the paved portion of the road is relatively constant width?
It's very fair to say that.
And you observed the location of a dam along the road, is that fair to say?
I did.
And do you also agree that Estabrook Road shows relatively little alteration from what you believe would have been its condition shortly after the 1763 layout?
That's a little hard for me to say in terms of the surface of the road, for example.
But would you agree that the road runs with topography generally?
Yes,
And so there's no major alterations of taking down hills or filling swamps or the like.
correct.
And based on these observations, I understand you came to the conclusion that Estabrook Road, where it is today, is the same as one of the two ways that was described in the 1763 county layout. Is that fair to say?
In my deposition, I believe that I did say that a small portion of it, in my estimation, was there, yes.
And the portion was the alternate route on that 1763 county layout. Is that fair to say?
Was a bit of the, yes, the southern portion, right?
I'm sorry, I want to make sure I understood that. Dr. Donahue agreed that the southern portion of the 1763 layout is
I think-
on the road today, on the ground today? Did I hear that correctly?
A small portion of, should we try to specify the location at which I thought that?
I think Dr. Donahue was confused as to the question.
Yeah, please repeat. I may.
Yeah, I'd be glad to go back. Based on your observation of the features along the road, which we've just gone through,
Yes.
and your reading of the 1763 layout,
Mhm.
would you agree that the 1763 layout conforms to some portion of the what's called the alternate route, the so-called second layout of the 1763 county layout?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, I'm sorry. I think I construe Mr. Bott as just asking if the 1763 layout conforms to the 1763 layout.
Yeah, that's what I heard. Mr. Bott. I want to make sure I understand the question as well as the answer. I understood that you intended to ask, I mean, from your first question, whether what's on the ground today conforms to some aspect of the 1763 layout. Am I correct about that?
Yes, Your Honor, I apologize.
That's not exactly what you asked.
I apologize. I was getting
Okay.
confused.
Let's
Your
try it
Honor,
again.
just for clarity purposes, can we just move to strike the last response then?
There's no need. Let's just
Okay.
move on, okay?
Yep.
So I'd like to move then, since I just brought it up, the 1763 county layout to exhibit
Well, I
18.
thought you were gonna ask that question again.
Oh,
I want to hear the answer. When I said
Okay.
move on, I meant I didn't mean to skip this topic.
Okay, I apologize. I'm getting confused. It's getting late in the afternoon, Your Honor. Is it your testimony that a portion of the 1763 county layout, namely the so-called second route laid out by the county, the alternate route, conforms to Estabrook Road today as it is on the ground based on your observation of the features of Estabrook Road?
Yes, with the caveat that I don't know how far south that extends. In other words, the 1763 layout stops at a certain point.
Thank you. And you didn't, for that matter, you've already testified that you didn't research the area south of Harvard's land holdings.
Correct.
So you wouldn't be in a position to even talk about that southern portion.
Exactly the point I wanted to make as well.
Yes. Thank you. So if we could move to Exhibit 18, to the transcription of that 1763 layout.
Are you going to bring it up, or shall I find it, or both?
I
got it.
I think you can find it. It might move things along a little bit quicker than
Have it
bring
right
up.
here.
I may have to bring it up if we get into great detail.
Okay, I'm ready.
By way of background, you did testify that many layouts specify a certain amount of compensation to landowners whose land might be affected. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say.
Do you see any evidence of compensation being specified in the 1763 county layout?
I don't.
Is it fair to say that you found other layouts that do specify compensation? I think is it fair to say you found other layouts that do specify compensation to landowners? I believe you testified to that.
I testified to that, correct.
And have you found some layouts that do not specify compensation to landowners?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that among the layouts you've reviewed, there's a range of specificity on these kinds of conditions?
Very fair.
And some would specify compensation, and some would specify that landowners give their land for the way?
Correct.
And some would not have any specification at all. Is that fair to say?
I'm trying to think. There may be some, yes.
And you agree that to evaluate any of the conditions in any of these layouts, you'd have to evaluate the circumstances case by case?
I think that's exactly right.
Thank you. And focusing on the condition that petitioners give their land for the way, except for Mr. Zacchaeus Green mentioned at the beginning of the county layout, do you know who any of the other petitioners to the county are?
It's a bit of a stretch, but Joseph Taylor was a petitioner, was mentioned as a petitioner when the town acted on the same layout earlier. So I think it's pretty fair to say Joseph Taylor was one of them. Other than that, I do not know who they are.
Okay. But the petitioners are the ones who are asking for the way to be laid out. Is that not correct? Whoever they may be.
Whoever they may be.
And is it fair to say that they wanted this road or perhaps another one, but they petitioned for a road?
That's fair.
And the road was to benefit them. Is that correct?
Presumably.
And if the layout was accepted and ordered by either the town or the county for that matter, it would thenceforth be maintained by the public authority. Is that fair to say?
Objection.
Overall,
Your Honor, that's illegal. Ask for a legal conclusion.
I didn't understand it that way. I'll allow the question.
Once again, would,
Please.
after an public authority laid out a way, would thenceforth the way be maintained at the expense of the town as it collected rates from its taxpayers?
No, I think, as we were trying to get at earlier, there's instances in which that is not the case.
That there was a formal layout but not at the expense. Do you see any evidence in this layout that the expense of maintenance of the way going forward past 1763 was at the expense of the landowners?
I see no evidence of that.
So perhaps it would be good to bring up that 1763 county layout now. Austin, would you mind doing that?
Exhibit 18.
Exhibit 18, yes, Your Honor. Dr. Donahue, can you see this well enough?
I can see it well enough.
Thank you. And Your Honor, you're ready. I see you.
I'm all set.
Okay.
Thank you.
Isn't it fair to say that the 1763 layout describes something of a process used by the county committee that was appointed that brought the interested parties in this way together?
Yes, I think that's specified.
And the first part of that process, if we move down to about halfway down, if you can follow me, where the sentence actually begins with the word viz, colon, in observance of the foregoing order. Do you see that?
I do.
And it's fair to say that the county committee, we, meaning the
Yes.
signatories, repaired to the place petition for the way,
Yes.
and that all parties were reasonably notified and assembled.
Yes,
You see that?
I do.
And I think we asked you, Ms. Allison actually was the one who asked you at your deposition, what your best estimate would be of the people that would have attended this meeting at the place that they repaired to. I think you said that there would be quite a crowd. Is that fair to say?
I think that is what I said.
And it would include landowners?
It's highly likely. Of course, we don't know. It's a bit speculative, but they were interested parties. So,
And I think you said they would almost certainly include Captain Buttrick. Is that fair to say?
that seems highly likely to me. He was getting on in years, maybe one of his sons, but sure.
And it would also include the selectmen?
Presumably, at least some of them. There were 5 of them.
Yes, and the other landowners within the Carlisle section, I'm sorry, the Concord section below the Carlisle line, that would likely have included David Brown, Captain David Brown.
You're stretching me there. I wouldn't know about those men.
Fair enough. Do you have any information that David Brown and John Brown were landowners in the vicinity of this layout?
Yes,
But if they were landowners, you're not sure whether they would have attended this meeting.
I'm not sure. David Brown, after all, was one of the calls. He had land at the north.
So then you have no view then whether he would have been at this meeting?
Again, you know, it becomes highly speculative of to how many of the landowners would have been there or not been there. There's certainly a possibility that he would have been there. I don't really know.
Well, that's fair enough. And then if you go down further to the below the first line of not signatories in the original to the layout,
Mhm.
Before said committee, that section, I'd like to focus just briefly on that. And the aforesaid committee said they discovered an alternate way. Is that fair to say? When they were viewing
That's what they
places
say.
with bird. And is it not true that they suggested and recommended in effect this alternate way be laid out because it was much more advantageous to the petitioners, it was less detrimental to private property, and more agreeable to all parties? Do you read that as I do?
You read it, and I agree that that's what it says.
Okay. Let's see. And then the court went ahead at the bottom of the page then, and it ordered two things, right? It took both reports, the first and the second, and it ordered both of those alternate ways to be laid out. Is that true of this document? Of this,
That is true.
Objection to your honor, to the extent he's asking for a legal interpretation of it.
Overruled.
We
Okay.
see that.
Thank you, Dr. Donahue. I want to ask you about a couple other documents that, first of all, that preceded this county order. Please refer to Exhibit 16.
I have it.
And do you see a date on this? I'm struggling myself.
It's December of 17th. It's the
Yes, there it is.
7th day. So yes,
Towards the bottom, it's on December 7th, 1763. Am I reading that as you do?
you are reading that as I read it.
And do you recognize this document?
Yes,
What do you recognize it to be?
a warrant for a town meeting.
A warrant for a town meeting. And do you see the first of the two articles that are included in this warrant?
Yes, I do.
Let me read this to see if the town will agree to a proposed alteration in a way in the northerly part of Concord as marked out by the court's committee. Do you see that part of it?
I do.
And do you see towards the end of this article who it was requested by?
I do. Captain Jonathan Buttrick
Was he the only one that requested it?
and others. Thank you.
Yes. So would you agree with me that this request for a town meeting article is a request from Captain Buttrick for the layout of the same way that was considered by the court's committee as the alternate way?
Objection, your honor.
Overruled.
Could you repeat that just so I can?
Sure. Would you agree that Captain Buttrick requested the town meeting through this warrant article to lay out the alternate way that the court's committee had previously suggested?
All I would know from this document was that he requested a town meeting to consider it, to see whether they would agree to it or not.
And I believe you testified that you'd seen this before. Is that right? You
I have, yes.
Yes. So moving to the next exhibit, which I believe is 17. Are you there, Dr. Donahue?
I am there.
Do you recognize this exhibit?
I do.
And what do you recognize it as?
It's a recording of the minutes of the subsequent meeting.
And just to be clear, that there's a part of this document up top of that double line that is really not part of
Right.
the record of the town meeting we're referring to. Is that fair to say?
Thank you. That appears to be an earlier meeting.
Yes, thank you. And at the meeting that we're concerned about here, do you see a date at which that meeting was held?
12th of December, 1763.
And you would agree with me, or perhaps you need to look at the Exhibit 18 again, that this was the day immediately before the county met to consider the layout at the county level?
Yes.
Thank you. And what do you take the vote to have been at this? Did they approve the article that was submitted by Captain Buttrick?
I believe that they did.
In fact, it says voted that the town will agree to the proposed alteration of the way
Yes.
as marked out by the court's committee through Captain Jonathan Buttrick's pasture and through John Brown's and David Brown's pastures to the way already laid out, provided that the court's committee report petitioners to give their land for said way. Is that the complete
That's
history there?
it.
Do you see any town meeting vote to award compensation to any landowner in this vote?
I do not.
So neither the article that was submitted by Captain Buttrick nor the vote on his article required any compensation as a condition of the layout.
Fair enough.
Action legal conclusion, Your Honor, regarding what a condition is.
Overruled.
Now, we've already talked about the county meeting the next day when they approved and ordered two ways to be ordered opened, to be an open way for the inhabitants of Concord and others, both the original and the alternate. Now, this town meeting vote did not approve anything about the original way as laid out. Is that true?
Your Honor, to the extent
County
Mr.
level.
Buck just mischaracterized the 1763 layout.
Repeat the question, please, Mr. Brown.
There was nothing in the article or the vote at town meeting that approved the original layout from the county's committee. Is that true? Original, not the alternate. We've been referring to two ways at the county committee, I'm sorry, the county committee laid out.
I'll allow the question.
Did you understand the question, Dr. Donahue? I'm glad
did.
to raise it.
I did. The vote indicates that they agreed to the alternative in the way number 2.
Thank you. I'd like to move to Exhibit 20. And I believe we have in Exhibit 20 a photocopy of the original as well as a transcription. 2 pages in the original and the third is the transcription. Mr. Anderson, could you bring up this transcription?
Yes.
I don't have a transcription in my Exhibit 20, just to let you know.
Nor I. But
I don't either.
All right, well,
Oh,
get it distributed later.
No, it's in it, they have it. It's just.
The parties agreed to it later, Your Honor, after we submitted the contested exhibits.
All right, it may not have found its way into my binder, but you're saying I have it somewhere?
You should have it. I'm informed by Mr. Anderson, who's been largely coordinating all the exhibits
Okay.
getting to all parties, including the court.
All right, and the defendants, do you have it or not have it?
I don't have a copy of Your Honor, but I will represent that we did agree to this transcription, and so I
Okay.
have no issue with this.
All right, we'll just sort that out later if people can't find your copy. You may proceed.
Dr. Donahue, do you recognize this exhibit, this document?
Yes,
And please identify the date of it.
March 15th, 1764.
Your Honor, just for the record, can it be clear that Mr. Bott is talking about the transcription?
Sure, the transcription is on the screen. The record should reflect that.
And focusing in on the first paragraph, would you agree with me, first of all, that this is a petition submitted by the town of Concord by a gentleman by the name of Jonas Haywood on the town's behalf?
Yes,
And he recites that last September, a committee was appointed to view the way petitioned for. You agree with that?
yes,
And it says a mistake was made in the way in the way that was reported and accepted by the court, and that mistaken way crossed the land of Captain Jonathan Buttrick. Do you agree with that?
that's what it says, yes.
And then going down to the second paragraph, they prayed, the petitioners prayed that the way through Captain Jonathan Buttrick's pasture be discontinued. Do you see that?
Yes,
And the court agreed with that petition and discontinued that way. Is that fair to say?
that's my
Objection.
recollection.
What's your objection?
I'm sorry, Your Honor. I withdraw that.
Okay,
And then it went on and ordered that the alternate way be confirmed. Is that fair to say?
Can we see the next page of the?
Sure.
transcript?
It doesn't go too much
Oh,
further.
yes, I see.
You feel free to read through that.
Sorry, I must have, hang on. Ordered that the way. Ah, yes, I see. Ordered that the way. Ah, so yes, they discontinue, to discontinue what we would call the first alternative with just a brief description of it. And then they essentially repeat the alternative way that they had also previously approved before.
So that to the extent that Captain Jonathan Buttrick may have been disadvantaged in some way by the layout and order of the court of the original way, this mistake, as they call it, was corrected.
Correct, as far as the original way is concerned, yes.
Thank you. I think we will leave that exhibit. So, Dr. Donahue, we heard quite a bit about contentiousness between the residents closer into Concord Center and the residents out there in the Carlisle area before it was a district or a town. And there were many issues that caused that conflict. Is that fair to say?
That's fair.
But in this case, when all parties were met with the court's committee in the place where they repaired to, and they decided on this alternate way, and it was later accepted by town meeting and ordered also at the county level to be laid out, does the political contentiousness continue to affect this way after public action was taken?
Your Honor, objection. I just want to note the characterization of the timing of that meeting. It appears in the first portion of that document. It's not clear that that document was created in one time based on the sequential ordering of the events of it.
You're
Sorry,
talking about exhibit. The 1764.
1760, no, he's talking about the 1763 layout, I believe, when he's referring to all parties meeting. And I believe Mr. Bott is,
That is fair to say. I'm sorry, Your Honor. I am referring back to the meeting that was described in the 1763 county layout.
Okay.
and
Right.
I just, Mr. Bott's characterizing the evidence that both layouts had all parties present and that was a certification applied to both layouts. And I want to make sure that I object to that characterization of the evidence.
I'll move on, Your Honor. I don't need to belabor this point.
Okay.
And you would agree that there are often disputes in colonial Concord over the laying out and acceptance of ways. Is that fair to say? I believe you testified to that at your deposition. Do you recall with Miss Allison?
I would think that some would be amicable and some might be contentious.
Mhm. But if there was contentiousness in those ways, once they were laid out, that was a done deal unless they came back at a later time and undid that, like the county in 1764 did.
Objection, Your Honor.
Overruled.
But that was a done deal. I suppose if the conditions, if there were any, had been met, it's well, anyway, I'll leave it there.
Okay. Move on. So I'd like to move to your testimony about what we've been calling the Esterbrook cellar hole.
All right.
And once again, you didn't review any archaeological surveys or artifacts that were collected at any time concerning this site.
I read the reports. I certainly did not examine the underlying data and so forth.
And when you say that the homestead was not there because it was not called out in the 1763 layout, is it not possible that someone moved up there immediately after 1763, let's say in 1764 in the spring, taking advantage of the new layout? And that homestead could have been there from that period of time forward?
That's, well, I don't know what you mean by that period of time forward. Do you want to?
Well, from any time from 1764 on, could that homestead have been established so that, you know, its lack of being mentioned as a call in the 1763 layout is of no consequence to its, in fact, being there from some period later than 1763?
No, I
Objection,
wouldn't.
Your
go-
Honor, but I'm not sure I understand the question, but also as Dr. Donahue has testified, he reviewed the deeds up to 1800. So Dr. Batt asking him to speculate about any point in time, both before or after the layout, it sounds like is a bit far afield.
I'm asking a simple question.
You asked me about the same thing, so I'm going to allow the question.
We're allowing the question, Your Honor? Could you restate the question, please?
Is it not reasonable to conclude that as early as 1764, a structure could have been built at that site?
one could have been built. The property was then conveyed by Jonathan Buttrick to his son Willard in his will in 1767, with no mention of a house on this parcel.
But once again, you aren't skilled in reading probate records or deeds to say whether houses would be mentioned or not.
Well, I haven't read more than, a few thousand of them.
Mhm. Perhaps it wasn't a house of Willard Buttrick. I believe that's who you said was his son. Captain Buttrick, I believe you said was fairly old at that point in time.
Yes, he died right after that. Well, I can't remember the exact date, 1768, 1769.
So I believe the probate records will reflect as title exhibit, if I can move to that. It was 1767. Would you accept that?
Oh,
Of the
close
probate
enough.
of Captain Jonathan Buttrick.
Your Honor, may Mr. Bat show Dr. Donahue what he's referring to?
Sure.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Ms. Kane.
It sounds to me that Mr. Bott is referencing a specific document. If I'm accurate, I would just ask that he would refer the witness to it.
Sure. Where it says it should be. No. Excuse me, it's not a major point, so we can, we don't need to pinpoint the date. I think Dr. Donahue and I agree within a year or two as to when Captain Jonathan Buttrick passed away. I think you mentioned 1768 or 1769, but it was only shortly after the 1763 layout and the 1764 discontinuance of the way through his pasture. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say.
So it wouldn't have been in the probate record necessarily if, let's say, it was built in 1769. And you're relying solely then on a deed not referencing that house. Is that fair to say?
No, that's not fair to say.
Okay. Let's move on. You testified about common land based on the map that you produced as a chalk. You testified as in 1653 that there was that broad white space that was still common land in 1653.
Correct.
And I think you testified that it was about 3/4 of the land that was left undivided as of the first division at that point in time. Fair to say?
Fair to say.
And when land was held in common, mainly from, at least up to 1653 and until it got divided out at some point later, ways were crossing that common land. Is that fair to say, to get to the uplands, to get to the meadows?
It's very fair to say, in particular, to get to the meadows. We're embedded within it.
And would the ways be restricted to passage? Would
No,
any
not.
persons be prohibited from passing along those ways of common land?
No, I don't think so.
And some of the ways would have crossed some of those private parcels embedded so that people could get to outlying land beyond those parcels. Is that fair to say?
That would have been fairly unusual because they were mostly trying to get to those parcels, but there may have been cases in which there was several private parcels together. I'm not quite sure what you're getting at here. This is the first
Okay.
division we're talking about.
The common land left over before the second division,
Yes.
what you
Yeah,
called about the privatization during the second division, this would have been still 1653 in the next
Right.
decade or so. Is that fair to say that
well, in the
they
next,
have crossed private property to get to outlying lands?
are you, excuse me for trying to get this clear, are you then, if you say the decade after that, then we're talking about the second division. Is that where you're, am I understanding you correctly?
I will get to the second division
I'm sorry.
and what happened after there was more privatization of that common
I see.
land, but I'm focusing really now on the common land in that earliest period after the first division.
During, yeah, go ahead. And the question is?
Would there have been ways that crossed private parcels unrestricted to passage in order to reach other common land?
Possibly.
And I have your book, The Great Meadow, here. It's almost easier for me to flip to pages in it, but I will have Mr. Anderson bring up the pages I refer to so that everybody can see them.
You purchased it, I hope. You didn't get it out of the library now.
I have it purchased, believe me. You made a lot of money off of me in this trial.
Thank you, sir.
It was a pleasure reading, but
Thank you.
so I would like to bring up page 103 of your book. And I hope that you recognize it.
I don't remember what was on page 103.
There you go. I have annotated, I have to say. I hope the annotations are not, do not alter the
offended.
opinion of what you originally said here. And could you read where you say it's kind of where the star is, and I start with each proprietor?
Each proprietor was to receive upland adjoining his meadow.
And
But the new division,
please continue for the next 3 or 4 lines.
but the new divisions were not to hinder highways to men's properties. That is, numerous unofficial ways had already been hacked through the forest, winding across pine plains and around spruce swamps, so that proprietors could reach their widespread first division mowing lots. That would be meadow.
Yeah.
Enough?
Thank you. That's enough for right now. And so this new provision that ways be not hindered that reach men's properties, this was in 1653 part of the authorization of the second division. Is that not true?
Exactly correct.
And then I believe you testified that over the next 10 to 15 years into the mid 1660s, would you agree that that reached in some cases up to early 70s, 1670s?
Yes, I think so. It's a little hard to distinguish. We're going by the dates at which these things were recorded into town records, and men made lists of the lands that they had received. So
certainly.
Yes.
Have you seen those lists that men made of their lands in the North Quarter?
I have seen transcriptions into the town records of those land grants, yes.
Okay. And so I want to move forward in time to the 20 score. Now, as the second division went on through the next 20 or so years, you saw some deeds of those individual parcels going to private property, is private proprietors. True? You mentioned
going to have to clarify that for me.
I'm sorry.
Could you restate?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You've seen deeds, second division deeds.
What's a
In
second division deed, excuse me?
our town record, it is dividing out land to individual proprietors
Got
in
you.
the 1660s and early 1670s,
So grants, yes.
grants of land
Mhm.
to individual proprietors. That is fair to say?
The vast majority of land granted in the second division in Concord was granted to individual landowners.
And have you seen any single town record that describes the 20 score and conveys the 20 score into 20 individual proprietors, as you said?
I have not seen a specific conveyance of the 20 score in that way, no.
Nor is there any document that you've seen that defines the boundaries of the 20 score. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say in this period. That's correct.
But you said that certain proprietors received rights in the 20 score. I believe you said.
I said that, yes.
Okay.
That's in the records of the lands that they were granted. It will make a note that says something along the lines of a 20-acre right in the 20 score.
Let me briefly ask you what you mean by acre right. Are you meaning that in a technical sense as used in the this colonial period of time? Do you have any background in interpreting that term?
I'm not sure what you mean by the question.
Well, is an acre right the same thing as 1 acre of land? Well,
I don't think that the point is that it's an acre right. It's the point is that they were estimating that this entire piece of land contained in the neighborhood of 400 acres, so that each of the people who were receiving a grant had a right that was equivalent to 20 acres within it, but they were not subdividing it at this point, so that the particular 20 acres weren't being identified. And it turned out over time that those rights weren't quite 20 acres. In extent, they were, by the time they got it all divided up, it was more like 18 acres at each of these.
We'll get to that math.
Okay. Fine.
You testified just now that the 20 score was approximately 400 acres. And why do you say that it was approximately 400 acres?
It's 20 score.
And what does that mean to you, that term, 20 score?
It seems to me to be a way of saying that there's a score of people getting a 20 acres right, or
A right that,
it's 20 times 20, 20 rights times 20 acres each.
okay, fair enough,
The way I take it.
fair enough. But there was no formal conveyance of that 400 acres to a group of proprietors. You said there's no single deed to that effect.
That's
So
absolutely.
why do you think that is anything more than remnant common land as opposed to property privatized at that point in time?
There was some remnant common land in other parts of the North Quarter and other parts of Concord that was referred to in just that way as common land or undivided land. And then there was a committee as late as the 1730s, I believe, that was charged with locating that land on behalf of the town. This is the town committee. And they granted it to some people who felt they were deserving some more. So there's a kind of process that we see that the town invoked later on to take care of that sort of remnant common land that you were talking about. Whereas with the 20 score, we can see a completely different pathway going forward by which the individual proprietors of the 20 score in 1697 and so forth, went ahead and acting only for themselves on behalf of themselves to subdivide that land.
Well,
That's my interpretation of it.
yeah, so just moving back a little bit in time to the 1760s, I'm sorry, the 1660s,
With you.
getting my centuries mixed up.
Yeah.
The 1660s, at that point in time, based on the 1653 town meeting vote, which turned over to each quarter the responsibility of dividing up town common land. Is that fair to say that's what that meeting was about?
Right. They delegated that responsibility to the quarters.
So the proprietors, how many proprietors, by the way, in 1653 in all three quarters were there?
I love it. 3/4. There were in the neighborhood of 50. It's hard to say exactly, 50 or 60.
And when the North Quarter proprietors started dividing up the land, how many were there in your estimate?
I had never counted them up, but I think right around 20.
So in other words, it's fair to say that about 20 North Quarter proprietors who were delegated the responsibility to start dividing out land, started dividing it out to themselves, and there was some piece of common land that they left undivided. In the same process that they might have continued to divide out land, and they did to the 20 score. Is that fair to say? But until they privatize that into individual parcels, what basis do you have to say that that 20 score was held in any other different way than other common land at that
Your
point in
Honor, I
time?
object because I don't think that any answer would create any record that would be able to understand what the question was.
I understood exactly what he's asking. I'll allow the question.
Okay.
Well, I saw, the 20 people who subsequently subdivided the 20 score. Well, there weren't 20 of them. There were a few, there weren't quite 20 of them. There was, I don't know, 16 or 17 because some of them had acquired other rights. So it's not as though anyone who moved into the North Quarter acquired rights within the 20 score. It was strictly limited to the original grants that were made to these 20 individuals in the 1650s or 60s, and to either their heirs if they passed on that right, or to someone who had bought it. So it's not being treated any way I can see as a common town or quarter resource that they would deal with at that level. It's being treated as a piece of property that's co-owned by a group of individuals. That'd be my interpretation of it.
Thank you, Dr. Donahue. So just by contrast, the Great Meadow, I'm going to refer back to that. Was the Great Meadow held in that same way as an undivided piece of land by the East Quarter proprietors that held that piece of land?
No.
How was that held?
That was held as a collection of individually owned mowing lots, some of who owned by individuals who lived actually in all the quarters of town, not everyone in town, but there was about 40 parcels within it. So they were privately owned parcels that were clustered one by the next along the river. And because of that quality, there were some aspects of common management, again, among that group of proprietors that were exercised over that land by agreement among them. And they did record some of that in the town book.
Thank you, but so I'll leave it at that.
All right. It's rather interesting if you'd like me to go on and on and on about it.
I think we'll
We should all
pause.
go out to a bar and listen to this all, but.
Yeah, yes.
We should sharpen our scythes.
Mr. Bat, it's almost 4 o'clock, and as you appear to be about.
I am we will have more questions, Your Honor, in the morning, I believe.
Mhm.
We're not wound up quite with the cross.
I wasn't expecting that you were, but I was noting that you were about to jump into what seems to be a new topic. So unless you just have a couple minutes of something that you want to get into, we can put now.
We will start to move into the various divisions of the 20 score, but just one last question I'd like to ask about the 20 score before it started to get further divided. Would you still agree, as you said in your deposition, that there's quote, squishiness along the edges of the 20 score that make it difficult to locate on the ground today?
Yes, my ability to map it accurately on all of its bounds is certainly limited.
Thank you. I think that's what we have today. If there's any slight follow-up on this line of questioning, Your Honor, we'll certainly seek to
Okay.
bring it up tomorrow.
All right. Well, this is actually pretty fascinating. I never got to do anything with zoning cases when I was practicing in this court. So I'm enjoying this very much, and I will read Dr. Donahue's book, but not until after I've written a decision in this case.
Fair enough.
And
I
I
think
will
it's
buy
fair to
it.
say Dr. Donahue's sales have skyrocketed in the last
Yeah.
year.
I hope selling 2 extra copies does not constitute skyrocketing. So,
Well, I've heard the YouTube has gone viral, Your Honor.
yes.
Uh,
All right. So we will resume at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Is there anything else anybody needs to bring up before we adjourn for the day?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Okay. All right. We'll see you all tomorrow morning.